You're listening to Aging Uncensored.
Okay, hello and welcome to Aging Uncensored. We are so excited to have Dr. Geldmacher back for our two-part series with him. We are fearlessly diving into the world of dementia and brain changes and everything research, behavioral therapy, environmental therapy, all the things that go along with supporting and helping our loved ones with brain changes and their family members. Of course, please recognize sometimes these things are things that can be reversed. Like Dr. Geldmacher said in our first series, he's going to be looking into, and his team will be looking into, is this something that may be caused by sleep apnea or medications or something other than actually the pathology that's going on in the brain. So very important to understand and rule out some of those things first before we dive into what leads next to, the embarking on dementia care, which is what we really dove into in the last podcast. This time with Dr. Geldmacher, we are going to focus on really some of the cool, exciting things that are going on in the world with research and what he's seeing, and then really give everybody some tips, tricks, and things that they need to know about maintaining brain health and overall health as we age. So I love this question. Nicole came up with this question. You just got back from Spain, which, yes, we were jealous. We want to go to Spain. Somehow we're going to try to figure out how to get in your suitcase next time. And you attended the Alzheimer's Clinical Trials International meeting in Madrid. So I guess kind of something fun. What was one of the, outside of the conference, what did you enjoy the most? I know you had Elizabeth with you and you had a good time. Elizabeth being what?
I really enjoy traveling to Spain. It's, I think, my third or fourth time going, and the food is outstanding. I love Spanish food, tapas and similar things. But the most fascinating thing we did on this trip was took a walking tour in Barcelona that took us into some of the ruins. And I did not realize that Barcelona goes all the way back to the times of the Roman Empire. And there was a Roman forum there and a wall that was built 2,000 years ago. And it's just looking at the history and being able to stand in its presence was really fascinating. I'm kind of a history nerd, so it fit well with my interest. But to just be in its presence was really very impressive.
Oh, so cool. No, I had no idea that they had Roman ruins there. That's really neat. What was the main focus for this particular conference? And kind of, I guess, give us some background about it. What is it? What did you do?
Sure. So the Clinical Trials in Alzheimer's Disease Conference has been going on now for close to 20 years, I think. And for most of that time, it was kind of a small, sleepy meeting and has exploded in the last several years as our therapies for Alzheimer's disease have become much more widespread, and the target for them is being better understood biologically through all the other research that's been going on. So a couple of years ago, in 2022, the results of the lecanemab trial, or we may know it as Leqembi, were released, and it was the room was buzzing with excitement. And to get a scientific conference that buzz with excitement is not frequent. But that's kind of the feel that we call the conference CTAD, that CTAD had. This year, a lot of the focus was on improving diagnostics. That is, what are the tests that we need to demonstrate that Alzheimer's pathology might be present in the brain? And I'll go back. The focus of the meeting is Alzheimer's disease, although other forms of dementia are also addressed, but I'll be focusing mostly on Alzheimer's. And so including the emergence of and improving accuracy of specific blood tests to identify Alzheimer's. So the problem over the years has been you can only really diagnose Alzheimer's disease with an autopsy, and that is no longer true.
Right.
We can now make a definitive diagnosis of Alzheimer's with a relatively complicated test like a PET scan, and we can get really, really, really close to that with blood tests, and the blood tests are getting closer and closer to that definitive diagnosis. Earlier this year, from the research perspective, and recognize this is not clinical care, but research, a paper was published that said just a single blood test is sufficient to make the diagnosis of Alzheimer pathology. That's a test called p-tau217. I think there's the opportunity for a lot of misuse of that in its current state of development, but as supplementary and complementary blood-based biomarkers emerge, I think we will be making that diagnosis with blood tests, and that is on the near-term horizon. That's within years, probably the end of the decade, for sure.
Dr. Geldmacher, I think since I've known you and listened to you talk, you have been doing research on all the different biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. Is this something that you're still actively researching, and have you been part of this development of the blood test?
Sure. I'm not a lab scientist, so I haven't been in the laboratory, like a mad scientist mixing the test tubes and coming up with a biomarker. I've got colleagues who do that work. But in the clinical trials space, understanding its application in making a diagnosis in a person, and then knowing whether that's sufficient to guide therapy, yes. So I've been on the applied science elements of this, and we've been looking for these kinds of markers for a long time. If we go back to the early treatments aimed at the Alzheimer pathology, the first of the plaque-lowering agents, we didn't have biomarkers at that time. We barely even had PET scans. And so in those first trials, fully a third of the people who got the anti-Alzheimer therapy didn't have Alzheimer's disease in their brain. So the therapy was bound to fail in those people. So now we're able to predict with much more reliability. We still use the PET scan as the defining element of positivity in a living person. We can now measure the amount of amyloid that's in the brain, not just decide whether it's present or not, but actually measure its concentration, and then know whether our treatment is lowering that. So those are really huge parts of it, and I have been parts of those studies that have contributed to that knowledge. But yeah, it's not my copyrighted work.
Yeah.
What research specifically do y'all have going on in UAB? I know there's, so many different dynamics and facets and divisions and departments. Of course, Our local resource, Alzheimer's of Central Alabama, funds a lot of junior researchers. So I know we probably will not be able to cover everything, but what are some of the primary ones you would love our audience to hear about right now?
Sure. So we can go in either direction, but I'll start from the building blocks. We have folks who are looking at the Alzheimer protein changes in test tubes and petri dishes, looking simply at the protein biology of the agents. We have folks who work with mice that have been genetically engineered to be able to develop Alzheimer's disease. That was a huge breakthrough back in the 1990s. Prior to that, to understand Alzheimer's disease, you had to study it in people. Humans were the only species that got it. And so now, instead of waiting 70 years for someone to develop pathology and understand it, in mice through genetic engineering, they're able to get the mouse to start to develop those changes in 6 months' time, which is tremendous. And that's what has allowed us to move forward with therapeutics in the way we have. The next step from that is, so now we can understand whether a mouse is getting Alzheimer pathology. We have folks who are developing drugs, medicines that might prevent that first step in forming Alzheimer pathology. So if we're building up amyloid in the brain, is there a medicine that can keep it from triggering the tau, the next step? So all of that's happening. Diagnostics, we're studying diagnostics. Are there better ways than PET scans? Are there better methods? So we have investigators, for instance, who are looking at detailed photographs of the retina in the back of the eye to see if that's showing early signs of Alzheimer change. And then in the clinical trial space, we're working on prevention. So people who might have Alzheimer changes in their brain by blood testing or PET scan, but no symptoms, and can we prevent those symptoms from emerging? And that's where my work comes in. All of my work really is with humans, either in studying the imaging or the next step. We're also looking at the public health side of things, the differential risk. We understand that here in Alabama, if you are African American, your risk of developing dementia and Alzheimer's disease is significantly higher than one of your white neighbors. And so understanding why is that the case? Is it genetics? Is it environment? Is it different factors that we don't yet understand? Things like exposure to air pollution may influence the risk for developing dementia. So all that research, all the way from proteins and molecules in a test tube to public health and being aware of how the environment influences the risk for dementia. All of that work in one way or another is being done at UAB.
How are you recruiting, or how does a patient get involved in some of this research?
Sure. So the most common pathway is through our clinic. So if you come to see us with memory difficulties, we often are able to refer to specific studies. We've talked a lot about the basics of the disease state of Alzheimer's, but we also have studies going on in conjunction with the School of Nursing on how to be a better caregiver, how to avoid some of those triggers of adverse behaviors and so forth. So, those things come through clinic. For the big studies, the national studies like on brain imaging and prevention, there are a lot of centralized advertising that goes on. So people are getting messages into their social media feeds and things of that sort, and are interested in this research, go to this website or call this number, and those get filtered down to us. So I would say clinical care, word of mouth through programming like this and through Alzheimer's of Central Alabama, and then national recruitment are sort of the three main pathways. One thing we don't have locally, and it's something I'm asked about very frequently, do you have studies on genetic risk of children of affected people? That is, mom had Alzheimer's. I want my genes tested, or I want to know what my risk is. And that's exceptionally difficult research to do. We have been for several years actively recruiting into that space, trying to get a research scientist, a clinically oriented geneticist to start to do those kinds of studies because they're critically important. But right now, that's one of the most commonly requested forms of research that I'm not able to deliver on locally.
Sure. So with the research on that, from my understanding, a young onset Alzheimer's disease, there is like the ApoE4 gene that can be tested for. But if someone develops Alzheimer's disease or different types of dementia later on in life, that's not something that can be as easily detected genetically. Is that correct?
That's correct. The younger you are, the more likely there are genetic influences. And I'm happy you brought up the ApoE story because that's one I get asked about frequently. So knowing your ApoE status, ApoE4 positive or negative, or 2 copies of E4 or not, does influence your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. It does influence the age at which you might get it, but it doesn't influence our interventions. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if you have no copies of the E4 gene or 2 copies of the E4 gene. That's the whole spectrum, 0 to 2. We tell you, keep your blood pressure under control, keep your cholesterol under control, exercise regularly, eat a healthy diet that's high in antioxidants, keep your brain active, stay socially stimulated. Those interventions work across the E4 spectrum. That's different than some of the early onset, what we call deterministic genes. So if you get a gene abnormality in presenilin or the amyloid precursor protein, those are called deterministic mutations. And if you get that, you will get the disease. Mm-hmm. These are very, very rare. They're less than 1%, maybe less than 2% of all Alzheimer's cases. So everyone else we give the same recommendations to. I am hoping, and I don't think it'll happen in my career, but I'm hoping that within the next generation of researchers, we'll move to the point of personalized medicine to say, well, you have ApoE and this gene and that gene and this one. That means for you, we need to focus on cholesterol and fat in your diet. Mm-hmm. And for the next person who comes in the office, we do a similar set of tests. And we say, aha, well, you're one of those people with high risk through inflammation and insulin resistance. We're going to focus on that for you. That's how we're going to prevent for you. So ApoE does not provide those personalized medicine suggestions to us. But I think before long, and this is some of the research we're doing through our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, we're doing what's called whole genome sequencing, looking at all the genes in the person and hopefully be able to pool this with other centers around the country to be able to say, okay, this is the profile where we focus on insulin resistance. So this is the profile where we focus on cholesterol. And this is the profile where we focus on inflammation. And I do think that will come, and I do think that'll be the world my children age into, where they'll be able to focus on those things.
And do you
It's
think
almost like we're kind of looking into, like, I'm so sorry, Nicole. It's like what, how cancer has evolved throughout all the years. And now even within just like, let's just take breast cancer, all the different types of it and how they're targeting each patient in a separate way. It sounds like that's what we're embarking on here with Alzheimer's specifically.
Yeah, I think for prevention in particular. So cancer had the advantage of a 40-year head start. So it was in the 1970s when Richard Nixon said, we're going to have a war on cancer. And it wasn't until 2011 when we had a national Alzheimer's plan. And finally, over these last couple of years, the amount of research spent per patient for Alzheimer's disease, the research dollars per affected person, is starting to approach what cancer has had for decades. And that's why I think we're seeing so many breakthroughs in the world of Alzheimer's disease and therapeutics and diagnostics. Is the money to support that work is finally there after a long period of being a second fiddle.
Right. Hopefully the awareness is coming on. I've said, we jump roped for heart when I was younger. We ran for cancer, but we hid from dementia. And so now hopefully we're trying to get this out into common community public space where people understand and they're not afraid of it, so that that drives the dollars, that drives the research that allows, experts like you to do what you're doing. And without that, national public health and community awareness, you're going to be kind of the, years behind. So that's exciting to see where we've come.
It is.
Yeah.
I work for and hope for the day where there'll be the equivalent of the pink license plate for Alzheimer's disease. The one that says survivor.
Yes.
Right. So that's, if I have a pragmatic goal, I want a license plate that says Alzheimer's survivor. And we don't have that yet. But I do think that that's a realistic goal for the years to come.
That gives me
back and I agree. Going back and teasing out kind of the different genes that make one more likely on a broader perspective, things like the All of Us research program, or larger things other than just what draws people to a neurology clinic or to neurology research. Do you see larger programs like that being effective in what the research will do?
Yes, I do. A lot of it will depend on the quality of the clinical follow-up to those individuals. But our genetics are exceptionally complex. We think about perhaps when we learned about genes in high school biology that, the carnation is red or white or pink because there's 3 genes. And it's much more complex than that. For every gene that makes a protein, we've got maybe a half dozen others that regulate when it gets turned on and off and so forth. So I think we're going to need very large numbers of people because of the very large number of genes that are affected. And we may end up treating Alzheimer's disease by turning a gene on or turning a gene off that's completely unrelated to the ApoE itself. So I think we need to have those broad genetic initiatives. In between what we can do locally with a couple of hundred people and what we can do nationally with tens of millions of people, like in All of Us, are the focus programs in Alzheimer's research where there may be across 30 collaborating sites in the country, several thousand people each year who are getting genetic materials donated and whom we follow with PET scans and memory tests and so forth, so that we can then look at those people and say, okay, well, memory scores go down by this much per year in people with this gene. Let's look out at the general population now. Let's look at the All of Us data and see how many people have that gene. Mm-hmm. And how can we learn more about those people? So I think all of those steps, from what is your mutation in this person sitting in front of me in clinic, to let's look at people who've gotten 10 years of consecutive memory tests, to people who've donated their genes one time, but there's millions of you. So
that's good.
So I know we just have a little bit longer with you. And again, Nicole and I we could sit here for the rest of the day. I guess 2 big questions. One is, great, exciting news, where we're coming from, where we've been from 91 to 2011, and of course, significance in 21 and 22. Are you seeing that we are able to recruit younger clinicians? Geriatrics, we're in psychiatry, we're losing those minds and that expertise all the time. So what are you guys doing, and what can we help with pushing and encouraging nurses, nurse practitioners, social workers, and of course the physicians into this space?
Yeah, the arithmetic isn't favorable. So the population is growing faster. The older population is growing faster than the production rate of all physicians, much less subspecialists and super subspecialists. I like to cite this number. People get tired of me citing this number, but there are more players in the NBA than there are certified behavioral neurologists in the country.
Wow.
Now, of course, they're being incentivized by multi-million-dollar contracts, which I have not yet been incentivized by. My bosses are listening. I'm open. So anyway, reimbursement's been a problem.
We'll get you an agent.
There we go.
You're our MVP.
So obviously it is a problem to try and recruit. And historically, reimbursement and payment has been a problem that cognitive and behavioral neurology doesn't pay as much as ophthalmology or dermatology, just based on supply and demand and the complexity of our patients. The opening up of therapeutics with our disease-modifying treatments over these last several years, I think, is beginning to make a difference. And if I look back at the world of multiple sclerosis, another debilitating neurologic disease, in this case affecting young people, up until the late 90s, early 2000s, very, very few neurologists chose to specialize in multiple sclerosis. But then they got disease-modifying drugs, and it has exploded. And now most fellowships, postdoctoral fellowships in multiple sclerosis are full. And we're seeing more interest in our specialty training in the area. Part of it's because Medicare has enriched the payment for these kinds of services, recognizing their complexity, and others that we now have people who think they can make a meaningful difference in the biology of the disease, the course of the disease itself. So that's physicians. For nurses and nurse practitioners, there is a much bigger supply available, but relatively little expertise in training for those folks in the world of dementia. So at UAB, we've collaborated with the School of Nursing to create a certificate, a postmaster's certificate in care of the older adult, focusing on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, so that a nurse practitioner, after obtaining his or her degree, can then get a specialty certification in that area and go out into a primary care practice and become the resource person for that primary care practice or neurology practice on managing the complexities of the dementia population that our team does every day.
Yeah, that's great. So how does a family, how do they get connected with you? How do they find out what's the best way? I know you said, primary care referrals and things like that, but if they're just out there doing some research and they want to know and they want to just kind of dive into it on their own and then, maybe facilitate getting to you guys, how does that work?
It's really difficult. So for people who are just interested in participating in research, I think the best place to start looking is at some of the national programs like the Alzheimer's Disease Research Centers, the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. If someone were to go to Google and say, how do I participate in Alzheimer's research? One of the places they would find themselves at is the National Alzheimer's Association. So we've talked about how Alzheimer's of Central Alabama is a local group that supports local families and supports local research. But a lot of this research is being done at national levels as well. And the Alzheimer's Association is a good clearinghouse for how do I get involved in that. In terms of care, and that's always the big question, how do I get to care in the memory clinic? We have a problem right now because of the relatively small number of clinicians and the overwhelming number of patients. We're actually booking 18 months out. So that if you called today in November of 2024, you'd be told if there's an appointment available, it would be in spring of 2026. We're working desperately to recruit the people in to serve the needs of this community, but we're not there yet. And so the other things we're doing is trying to work with our primary care providers to go through what are those tests that someone needs to do to find out if it is or is not Alzheimer's. And then if it is someone who needs our special expertise, our subspecialty training, communicate with us directly from the physician perspective, and we can try to work something out for that individual. But I would love to be able to say the doors are open, show up tomorrow, but we're not there. We just don't have the personnel, the human power to do that.
I know you mentioned the rapid access when we met, and that's for the infusion specifically, I believe, right?
It's our target is to try, because the infusions work most effectively in the mildest stages of the illness. We are piloting a rapid access program where someone who has not had other workup, their primary care doctor can call and say, I think they'd be a good candidate for the infusion therapies. Can you get them in quickly? And one of our nurse practitioners then would do what we call a rapid access intake, do a quick screening, and if the person is mildly affected and generally healthy, do the testing necessary to try and get them in for the infusion therapies, again, because they work in the mild stage. This isn't the pathway in for the person who's got advanced dementia or where behaviors are the most prominent difficulty. We just can't do that in that fast turnaround kind of time. But for the person with mild cognitive impairment, who is generally healthy and is interested in infusion therapies, talk to the primary care doctor about getting referred and have that doctor make a mention in the referral for the rapid access. And that's the best path forward for those folks.
Right. All right. One last tip or trick or anything that you want to leave us with. It could be a favorite quote, favorite book, or just a favorite message. Brain health equals heart health. I've said that many times. What would you like to leave?
So for the generic audience as a whole, the messaging I would say is, yes, take care of your heart health, and the brain will follow along on its own. And the best ways of doing that is the Heart Association. The American Heart Association has published a set of guidelines or principles to follow for good brain and heart health. It's called Life's Simple 7. And, keep your salt content down, keep your exercise up, eat foods with antioxidants. But for those people who are worried about where their cognition will be 5 and 10 years from now, that Life's Simple 7 is really the best rule book to follow. No yellow flags. Not for you, Christy.
No, I'm not going to throw any yellow flags. That's right. I'll bring it to that.
So that's those things. At the personal level, what's my tip? Find things, and I'm going to sound like Marie Kondo here, find things to give you joy. What is it that engages you, makes you feel good? And find those things and do them. When we feel good, or I should say this, the more often we do things that make us feel good, the more often we will feel good, even when we're not doing those things. So basically try to approach life with a positive viewpoint and do the things that make you feel positive. And that will radiate out into so many parts of our health and well-being and relationships that it's hard to go wrong when we do things that make us feel good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been such an honor to have you on with us. And I'm sure we will be asking for you to come on at other times and dive into other different things. So we just are so honored that you are actually literally across, over the mountain from our office here, and have been a longtime friend. And of course, we've all been longtime supporters for Alzheimer's of Central Alabama. And just thank you for your support and all the things that you're doing. And the clinic is amazing. So if you are a patient or a family that has the opportunity to be in the clinic, you're going to really see some unique things that are happening over there. And we just love to connect with you, Dr. Geldmacher. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure to be part of it, and I'll look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Okay. Like, subscribe, and follow on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all the things. And we appreciate you listening to Aging Uncensored. And this has been an incredible 2-part series with Dr. David Geldmacher from the University of Alabama at Birmingham Brain, Aging, and Memory Clinic. So thank you, and we're signing off. Thanks, Dr. Geldmacher.
Bye.
Bye.